welcome to The Explainer. So, jump right in and imagine this scenario for a second. You're trying to survive in a deeply materialistic, highly complex society, right? But you are strictly bound by an absolute vow to reject worldly wealth. How on earth do you eat? Where do you sleep? How do you handle just the day-to-day logistics of, being alive without totally compromising your spiritual purity? Well, today we are decoding excerpts from the 10 Recitations Vinaya. These are the ancient monastic laws governing Buddhist monks. And we're going to analyze two massive pain points for these early spiritual seekers. First, the incredibly precise regulations surrounding something as mundane as their sitting rugs. And second, the absolute uncompromising ban on handling money. We are going to see exactly how ancient monks balanced these high spiritual ideals with the very gritty realities of daily survival.
Okay, here's our roadmap. We're starting with the origins of these precepts. Then we'll look at the ethics behind rug materials, followed by the strict rug replacement procedures. After that, we'll dive into the ban on money, and finally, how they used a pure person to navigate it all. Let's get into it.
Section 1. The Origins of the Precepts. Now, it's a super common misconception that ancient religious laws were just sort of handed down in a vacuum, but these rules were actually direct responses to societal friction.
Yeah, so according to the text, the lay people, meaning the local citizens and the wealthy donors actually supporting the monasteries, were furious. There was this notoriously troublesome faction of monks mentioned in the texts, famously known as the Group of Six. And these guys were going around demanding incredibly expensive items, hoarding luxury goods, and acting, well, as the locals put it, like kings and ministers. The public outcry was massive. The very people financing the monks felt like they were just feeding a community of greedy, insatiable guys, which completely defeats the entire purpose of supporting a spiritual order in the first place.
Moving on to Section 2, the ethics of rug materials. This huge public backlash basically forced the Buddha to establish strict ethical foundations for what a monk could actually own.
So what were the actual ethical constraints driving these new rules? Well, it wasn't just about looking poor for the sake of it. There was a really profound ethical logic here. First up, compassion. Producing silk meant boiling and literally killing thousands of silkworms, so that's a no-go. Second, contentment. Monks fundamentally needed to reduce their worldly desires. Third is efficiency. Think about it. Begging for rare, premium materials takes an immense amount of time and labor. That is time that's supposed to be spent on meditation, reading scriptures, and spiritual practice. And finally, as we just saw, maintaining the respect and the faith of the general public was absolutely critical for the survival of the community.
What's really fascinating here is just how specific these bans got. The text explicitly outlaws sitting rugs made of silk and rugs made of pure black wool. Why? Because pure black wool was incredibly expensive and super rare in that region. If a monk was caught making a rug out of these materials, the consequences were heavy. We're talking total confiscation of the rug and a formal public confession of the offense before the community. This specific penalty was known as Nissaggiya Patitia. The prohibited item literally had to be surrendered.
But human nature being what it is, some monks definitely tried to find loopholes. They probably thought, okay, fine, no pure black wool. I'll just use 99% black wool and add a tiny little tuft of white. Well, the Buddha anticipated exactly that. To completely shut down this loophole, the text mandates a strict, unchangeable formula for wool rugs. Your rug must contain a maximum of 50% black wool, and it absolutely has to include 25% white wool plus 25% inferior wool. We're talking the rough, scratchy hair from a sheep's belly or legs. This was a brilliant move. It forced the rugs to look totally ordinary and stopped any monk from flaunting high-status, pure-colored materials.
Section 3. Rug Replacement Procedures. Okay, the materials are heavily regulated, but what stops a monk from just throwing away an appropriately made rug every few weeks to get a fresh one? 6 years. That is the magic number. The Vinaya text mandates a hard, non-negotiable 6-year lifespan for any sitting rug. You make a rug, you keep it for 6 years, period. Discarding a rug and making a brand new one before that 6-year mark, without formal authorization, was a direct violation. Again, that meant public confession and forfeiture of the new rug.
But look, practical reality happens, right? What if your rug catches fire or tears totally beyond use in year 3? They couldn't just freeze to death. So this required an exception, managed through a process called a Sangha Karma. Think of this as a formal, democratic, legal proceeding held by the monastic community. It was essentially an ancient monastic court to investigate claims and authorize exceptions.
Let's map out the exact procedural steps here, because the logic is great. First, the monk has to respectfully approach the assembly, bare their right shoulder, kneel down, and formally state their problem. They'd say something like, "My rug is too thin," or "My rug is torn." Second, the Sangha doesn't just blindly take their word for it. They investigate. The text uses strict if-then logic. If the monk says it's torn, but the assembly looks at it and realizes it can actually be patched, request denied. If they say it's too thin, but it's actually fine, denied. Only if the investigation proves the rug is truly, completely beyond saving, does the Sangha grant formal approval to craft a new one. And this leads us to what is absolutely my favorite detail in all of these ancient rules. Even when you are officially granted permission to make a new rug, you don't just get to enjoy a flawless, pristine new item. Nope. The text dictates that a piece of the old, dirty rug, specifically one handspan in size, must be cut off and physically sewn onto the border or top of the new rug. The explicitly stated purpose? To ruin its color. This ensured that the resources of the donors weren't wasted, for sure, but more importantly, it was a profound psychological tool. It instantly killed any vanity or attachment to a shiny new possession. All right, Section 4, we are pivoting now to the second major theme here, the ban on money. If managing rugs was tough, managing the ancient economy was an absolute minefield. The source text very explicitly contrasts these two identities. On one side, you have the ideal spiritual seeker. They are content, meditating, relying purely on the charity of alms. On the other side, the worldly merchant. And once again, our notorious group of six was out there pushing the boundaries. The text describes monks literally using gold and silver to set up storefronts, trade goods, buy land, and even manage herds of animals. Obviously, the public was outraged, pointing out that they were acting exactly like secular merchants. So, a total, uncompromising ban on monks handling gold, silver, or any type of coin was instituted. But hold on. This creates an enormous practical dilemma. If you are part of an institution that physically cannot touch the currency needed to buy medicine, repair leaky roofs, or even acquire those very specific wool materials we just talked about, how do you survive? How do you actually exist in a society built entirely on commerce without touching commerce? Section 5, using a pure person. The solution they came up with is a truly fascinating piece of ancient bureaucratic ingenuity. Enter the pure person, or as it's called in the text, the Jingren. This is a crucial concept. A pure person was an unordained layperson who volunteered or worked for the monastery. Because they were not monks themselves, they were completely exempt from the strict Vinaya rules regarding wealth. They basically acted as a financial proxy, handling the dirty work of daily commerce so the monks could remain karmically pure and totally detached from the physical money. The procedural choreography here is highly specific, all designed to ensure the monk's detachment. Let's say a donor comes up to a monk and tries to hand them some silver. Step 1, the monk must explicitly refuse it. They cannot accept it, not even for a second. Step 2, the monk points to the pure person and says, "Give it to them." Step 3, the pure person holds those funds and uses them later to buy allowable, pure goods for the monastery, like medicine or food. The monk's hands literally never touch the wealth. Now, what if they were just bartering goods, no coins involved? Well, that was heavily restricted too. You couldn't trade dissimilar items. No trading a spare bowl for medicine. It had to be like for like. Interestingly, the text reveals that when monks did barter, disputes inevitably broke out. So the Buddha implemented what has to be one of history's earliest consumer protection laws, a 7-day grace period. If a monk regretted a trade or realized they got totally cheated, they had exactly 7 days to reverse the transaction and get their original item back. How great is that? And what happened if a monk just straight up broke these financial rules? The procedures were totally unforgiving. The illicit gold, silver, or goods had to be immediately forfeited. The offending monk had to stand before the entire Sangha and confess. And crucially, that forfeited wealth was handed over to a pure person to be repurposed. They'd use it to buy communal items, specifically things like bedding for the whole monastery. The rule breaker never got to keep the fruits of their crime. Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. As we look at these incredibly intense regulations, from sewing dirty old patches onto brand new rugs to using lay proxies just to buy basic medicine, we really have to ask ourselves, are these just dry, overbearing, ancient, bureaucratic controls?
Or are they actually a profound, psychologically brilliant framework? They recognize that human attachment is subtle, it sneaks up on you. So they built a physical and procedural environment to make true detachment actually possible in a deeply materialistic world. It is a fascinating look at where high ideals meet gritty reality. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this gives you a whole new perspective on mechanics of ancient monastic life.